Hello and welcome to the next instalment of our podcast. Today we're talking about the future of banknotes in a digital world with the author of our new report, Keith Jacques. Hi Keith, nice to see you again.
Hello.
So let's jump straight in because this is quite an interesting one. So I wonder if you could give us a little bit of a synopsis as to why this is such an interesting or important topic.
Well, we've all seen the rise in digital payment methods, whether it's contactless cards or digital wallets. And so that has seen a fall in the use of cash for payments in probably most parts of the world. But despite all that, banknotes still have an important role to play. Maybe a changing role, but it's still highly important. When it comes to cash payments, these are still critical for people who don't have any access to banking services. And there are an estimated 1.4 billion of these still around the world, mainly in Asia and in Africa, but basically they're in all areas, including so-called developed nations. There are still significant numbers of people who don't have access to a bank account, and if you don't have a bank account, you still need access to cash to be able to make your day-to-day purchases. There are also people who really just don't get on with digital technologies for whatever reason, whether they don't have the digital skills, whether they don't want to. They still need to be able to access cash and be able to use cash on a day-to-day basis. And one important factor, and it's one that we've seen over the last couple of years, is that as people's budgets tighten because of the high cost of living that we've seen over the last 2 years, people they've turned to cash because it's an easier way of controlling their budgets. We've seen an increased use. Okay, it's not double the use of cash, but it has been a blip upwards in the use of cash. So cash and banknotes still have a clear place in society, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
It's really fascinating to think of the role of cash changing as the digital technologies become more accepted and widely used. I wonder, thinking more broadly about the market as a whole, what are we seeing as sort of key trends in this area?
Well, what we've seen is a great increase, as I've said already, in digital payment systems, which means that banknotes for payments are becoming less widely used. But at the same time, what you're also seeing is that banknotes, the currency in circulation and the number of new banknotes issued every year is still increasing pretty well across the board. Nearly every country across the world, you're having the same situation, even ones which are using very low amounts of cash for day-to-day payments. The reason for this is still a little bit unknown. There's this so-called paradox of banknotes, where you're using less banknotes, but the number of banknotes is increasing. Central banks seem to go on the theory that what is happening is people are using cash as a store of value. So they're hoarding it rather than using it in the event that you come across some crisis. And we've had 3 major crises in the last 15 years. We had the crash of the financial systems in 2007-8. Then we had COVID in 2020. And then just as we thought we're getting out of that, then you had the Ukraine war and the high energy costs, high costs of living, high food costs. So this seems to be the theory that people are kind of hoarding these as contingency. Another theory which has been expounded is that the increase in cash is actually being used by criminal organisations. The advantage of cash for the criminals, of course, is it's not traceable. It's all completely anonymous.
And in terms of the technical innovations that we're seeing in this industry or this market, what are the key ones that stand out to you or have stood out to you as you've researched this more?
The main thing, again, is still security. I think the level of counterfeiting is probably at an all-time low because banknotes are increasingly more difficult to counterfeit. We've also had a growth in things like polymer-based banknotes to improve the durability of them, and there are now quite a few countries around the world who adopted polymer notes. But there are other ones, notably the USA, which says it's not going to go polymer. It's quite happy with its cotton paper substrates, and it'll carry on. One innovative security feature that was introduced in the last 5 years is the cinema security feature introduced by CCI, who is the biggest manufacturer of polymer banknote substrate in the world. It covers about 80% of the world's supply of polymer banknote substrates. And they have developed what they call this cinema system, which allows you to integrate what seem to be moving images into your banknote. And the whole thing is enabled by the substrate itself. So it's not something you could copy because you need this specialized substrate. There doesn't seem to be anybody who's actually using it yet, but obviously it's something that they are promoting. And then because new banknotes don't come out every year, so it will take time before it gets into the system. But certainly I think within the next 5 or 10 years, you'll start to see banknotes with this system in. I suppose the biggest advance in digital payments is digital wallets. The use of digital wallets is growing fast. North America, where you would expect to be a big user of digital wallets, actually been fairly slow in taking them up. Even though Apple Pay and Google Pay come from America, they're used still not as much as they are in Europe, and certainly not in somewhere like China, where almost everybody uses them.
So in terms of regulation, if we look at the things that are affecting this market externally, what are the key things that this market needs to look out for in the next 5 years?
I think the regulators have spent a lot of time on things like anti-money laundering regulations, really, as I said, to try and stop the movement of money, not just from criminal organisations, but from terrorist organisations. I think now most systems are now in place. But where regulators are starting to get involved is, again, because of the declining use of cash, there is a real danger that certain sections of society or certain areas will find it very difficult to access cash. Particularly in rural areas, remoter areas, the banks are closing their local branches because a lot of people are using internet banking. We're making a lot of payments by digital means. So the number of ATMs has also been declining across most of the world. And what we now see is that governments are starting to step in and say, we need to ensure that the whole of society is included in the financial system, not just those who have a card they can wave in front of a contactless machine, but also the people who will still want to carry on paying cash. The onus is being put by governments onto central banks, who are then putting the onus onto commercial banks to make sure there is still a reliable access to cash distribution system almost everybody in the country can get to. The other thing is that ATMs may not be the right answer in some places, so you're starting to see an increase of things like cashback systems through retailers.
It's amazing to see where the changes are happening in this market as things develop and things change. What areas are seeing the most growth in this industry, would you say?
I think in terms of banknotes, I think it's not so much in the area of growth. I think it's a change. Some countries have withdrawn the highest denomination banknotes. I mean, India, for instance, I think gave 4 days' notice that they were withdrawing the 2 largest denomination banknotes, and they suddenly take them out, which caused all kinds of problems in India, which was still a very largely cash-based society at that time. They wanted to reduce the amount of tax avoidance and to reduce the amount of money getting to criminals. And then at the other end, what you're seeing is that, particularly in developed countries, you're seeing more people taking out kind of medium denomination notes. So that 20 or 50, and which is again an indicator that it's being taken out as a store of value rather than taking out cash to be used on a day-to-day basis. But having said that, you still see people are still introducing new banknotes. I think last year, 2023, there were nearly 100 new banknotes issued around the world. And in other parts of the world, they're putting out new banknotes, higher security, because they still believe that these are going to be needed. In Denmark are ones that have always said, oh, well, these are the ones that are going to go cashless. The Danish central bank, has announced plans that it is drawing up new designs for banknotes to be introduced in 2 or 3 years' time. So they see still a long-term future, or certainly a medium-term future for banknotes.
I suppose conversely, which parts of this market are struggling the most? Where are we seeing the players not quite getting it right, or things that are really struggling in this market?
I think there are two areas here. One is cash in transit, because as we said, people are using less cash, so that the cash in transit people are really struggling, because the model is to move large amounts of cash to a small number of locations. Now they're being asked to move smaller amounts of cash to a larger number of locations, and their financial structure, they can't cope with it. So what you're seeing is a lot of consolidation within this industry, where smaller players, or ones that are really struggling, are being swallowed up by other ones to try and make the thing more viable. I suppose the biggest struggle of all for the financial world is are we going for a cashless society? I mean, this has been debated for 10 years, or probably more now, and everybody predicting, yes, we're offering cash. Nobody will be using cash by, it's a bit like 1984. You predict something for a particular year, and of course it never happens. I mean, Sweden was predicted to be cashless by 2023. They're still using cash. They are also looking at ways that they can still make cash still available to everybody. So they're certainly not going to be cashless. China says it wants to go cashless. I mean, this seems to be a government strategy to go cashless. But they also have had to issue instructions to the banks to make sure cash is available, not only for people in rural communities to be able to get hold of it, but also because of the influx of tourists coming into the country who can't use their Western credit and debit cards because the Chinese system won't allow it. They can't use their Apple Pay or Google Pay because they are banned in China. They can't get hold of the Chinese digital pay systems because they're not Chinese citizens. So the only way a lot of them can pay is by cash. I think the general consensus seems to be we are not going cashless. Probably more, we're going less cash. And that cash, as I've already said, cash will start to be used for a different purpose, but it will still be there. It'll be there as a backup, and people still feel comfortable with cash. People like the anonymity of it. The more digitalized we go, particularly in a lot of countries, the more people are afraid about personal intrusion, invasion of privacy. They don't like to think that all their financial transactions are being closely monitored by anybody, let alone by the government.
That's great, Keith. Thanks ever so much for your time today. It's been great to chat about banknotes and learn a little bit more about what's happening. A reminder that the future of banknotes in a digital world to 2029 is available for purchase from today. Thanks ever so much, Keith.
Okay, thank you. Been a pleasure.